Hey everybody, welcome to Habitat Now. I'm your host Aaron Shea, and it's an honor to have artist Elliot Walker join us from the UK. He is traveling from home. He's between places, but he's making this happen, and it's a real honor to have him join us. Many of you remember him from season 2 of Netflix's Blown Away. For those who don't know, I'm spoiling it for you. He's the winner of the show, so get on Netflix, watch that show, watch him tear his opponents apart, which is what
Yeah.
he did live between wrestling matches. So uh, Elliot has a new body of work we're going to talk about, which is absolutely incredible. And we've been trying to get this presentation together for a while now. It's great to be able to work with him and share his career. And we are big believers in him and his work. So this is a lot of fun to have him join us today. So without further ado, I'm going to take over your screen real quick, go through a little housekeeping, which is what I love to do anyway. So we do these Zooms every Saturday at 1 o'clock. The next 2 Saturdays, I'm working on, and Regina will be helping out at the gallery before she leaves, before she gives birth. She's very close to having a new member of her family, so but she'll be participating in the Zooms for the upcoming weekends. If you don't know, on the top right of our website, there's a little hamburger there. You can see this little arrow over there. And if you click that, it says Zoom. You can sign up for the Zooms every single week right there, but I do send them out via email. If you haven't seen Glass 52, you're welcome to come see it. It's an incredible display of over 300 works on display. We're going through a little construction right now, but there's still plenty of artwork to see. So come and visit us at the gallery here in Royal. The Habitat Blown Away shop is open. So it's on the habitatshop.com. We're still buttoning it up, but we're putting artworks up there. And the idea behind is to be able to purchase artwork online that's under $5,000 by many of the artists in our Habitat family. Check it out. We have some great, talented artists work up there, and more is going up every week. The Seattle Glass Tour. We put out some notifications recently about this trip. It's happening in October. The space is limited, so book now. Make sure you sign up to join Ferdinand and Kathy Hampson as they travel in the Seattle area, visiting artists like Dale Jehuli Studios, Shelley Allen, Preston Singletary, Raven Sky River, and so many more. Going to the Tacoma Museum of Art and the private boathouse of Jehuli. This is like I think Ferd said this is like his eighth time doing this trip, so it's all buttoned down and it's an incredible experience. So contact me right away. I'll hook you up with the right people so you can participate. So all that aside, it's an honor to have Elliot join us today. His new work is simply incredible. We have work at the gallery itself, and he has work in the studio. This is kind of a mixture of both collections that are available through Habitat. Many of you saw him, as I mentioned, on season 2 of Netflix is Blown Away. And if you haven't seen that, zoom in and watch that anytime. So without further ado, Elliot, thank you for joining us today. We have all the work on the website. So I'll kick it a link during the presentation so you can check it out. But let's get to it. And thank you today. Thank you for joining me today, Elliot. And I'll have you say hi to everybody.
Hi, hi. Thank you for having me. Thanks to the whole team, and thank you for joining. Um, there's quite a lot going on for me at the minute, and doing sort of talks and presentations is always a nice excuse for me to sort of think about what I'm doing and try and put it into a rational thought and into context for myself as well as explaining it to other people. So I'll try and keep all these thoughts as sort of concise and as understandable as I can.
That's great,
I
Elliot.
think
Go ahead and
I
take
am.
over the screen. That's great.
Am
Yeah,
I
it's good.
sharing?
Yep, you are. You're perfect. Just click on that button. It's always
Okay.
amazing to catch up with an artist what the year is like because it's so much different from the average person. So I'm excited for this, and let's get to it. Thank you, Elliot.
Cool. All right. So my name's Elliot Walker, obviously, and as Aaron was saying, I was a contestant and the winner on Blown Away, season 2. I haven't actually included anything about that in the talk today because I feel like in the last sort of couple of years I've talked an awful lot about Blown Away. But if there's any questions about it, please feel free to ask. So I'll just do like a little brief sort of background on sort of my development so far, just going back to education. A lot of the things I've been thinking about at the minute actually link back to how and where I was educated and how that's informed the work I'm making at the minute. So I am from the Midlands of the UK, and that's where our studio is now. I studied in a college and a university in the Midlands. I got a master's degree in applied arts, whatever that means. And when I was at college for a year, I basically was an associate of this college. So I paid them some money as a person who'd never touched glass before, and then they let me free on the equipment. So this is sort of the way the education system for glass works in the UK. You can gain a bit of access to the tools and to the equipment, and then you're basically left alone. So for a lot of my sort of initial development, I was sort of self-taught a lot of the time. Um, I must have done a reasonable job of teaching myself, because as soon as I graduated from my master's degree, I was picked up by a team, a very special studio in London called London Glass Blowing. So it's a unique studio in the UK. It's very different from most of the other studios where it's a maker and an assistant. In this studio, there's a team of artists um, working under the owner of the studio. So Peter Layton was one of the sort of pioneers of studio glass making in the UK. He brought it over after seeing Harvey Littleton's sort of, first sort of forays into small furnace technology and small furnace building. And he brought that over with a guy called Sam Herman, American guy, to the UK and started up the studio. So I was really lucky to work with the team there. There's about 5 or 6 different artists, 3 gaffers, who work at that place under Peter, and they also make their own work, and they have a gallery there as well. It's a really interesting place. So I started after my graduation, very green, but sort of soon progressed to being a gaffer there with the London Glass Blowing team. And that's really where I sort of cut my teeth, and I learned a lot of the more refined elements of the skill. So it says after here, but it was actually at the same time that I was working in London and living in London. I was there for about 10 years for my sins. And during this time as well, I started developing my own sort of studio practice and my professional practice as an artist. So this started off by traveling around the country to hire different studios. And again, this is quite a different environment we have in the UK. There's only really 2 places you can hire. One of them is incredibly cheap, and I think rickety might be the right word for the studio. And the other one is beautiful and pristine and insanely expensive. So I sort of like chopped and changed between these 2 studios for different projects. When I needed something good, I went to the expensive one. And for a lot of other stuff, I was in the ramshackle bodge job studio, which is quite interesting. The work that I wanted to make from the start, it requires like an awful lot of control of the environment that I'm in. And I'm quite sort of an anxious person as well. And so I need, a certain environment around myself. So I started working more and more at this expensive studio, and economically it wasn't going to last for too much longer with my bank balance. So I started looking for opportunities to have my own space, of space that I could control, so I could control my output. I had full control over my output, and I had as much time as I needed to make. So I was still in London at this point. So I ended up sharing a studio with a very well-established artist and glassmaker called Simon Moore in the UK. And he was working as like an artistic director for a Czech glass company. So he'd fly over to Czech for like 2 weeks out of every month. And then myself and Bethany would sort of invade his studio, and we'd have it to ourselves for 2 weeks of the month. So I was sort of splitting my time there. This was in King's Cross in the center of London, and it was in an amazing sort of multi-studio old factory building, which had a goods lift, which was always breaking down, and it was on the 3rd floor, and there was no public access. And it was like, well, why are we here? It just didn't really make much sense. So eventually I convinced him to move out of London to a really big unit where we actually had 2 studios in one. So at this point, I was sort of investing in equipment, and we had our half of the studio, he had his, and it was basically 2 top shops in one. And again, this was like quite an unusual thing to be doing in the UK, but it was a really great stepping stone for me at this point in time. Oh yeah, I also have a degree in clinical psychology that I got from a Welsh university, but we won't talk about that right now. So where are we now? So in 2022, so shortly after we filmed the Blown Away series, shortly after the release of the Blown Away series, we moved, and it was at the end of the pandemic as well. So it was a bit of a crazy time, but we actually moved the studio from the outskirts of London after 10 years back to the Midlands, where, it was like coming home for me. It was a really good step. And obviously, the exposure that we gained from Blown Away really helped us sort of finalize the equipment we needed to move into the studio. So we actually, I'm more of a country person than a city person. So we actually live in this lovely little village on the outskirts of the Midlands now called Kimber. And it's got really interesting sort of areas around it. So this building here, so there's a few of these, they're actually built into the side of the sandstone cliff. And
Wow.
these were the direct inspiration for Tolkien's Hobbit holes. So these are like fascinating little things. And every time I post these on Instagram, a lot of people in the States are like, "Oh my God, your house is so cool." It's like, well, it's not my house, but it is an interesting place. So I'm now out of the city and I'm back where I belong, I feel. So the site we're actually at is a very important historic site. It's in the Midlands. It's in the area I was born and grew up in, and it is on the site of the Red House glass cone, which is this image in the left. It's a traditional um, glass making cone building, which would have had the furnace in the center and then the teams of people working around the outside. So it's got like 200 over 200 years of glassmaking history on this site, and they only stopped using it as a proper full-blown factory in the 1940s. So there was a lot of work coming out of this place. Um, you know, it obviously finished before I was born, but then there were people still making within the cone, but it wasn't a full-blown factory at that point. So I have a long history with this building. When it's run by the local council, and when I was studying in the area, I was actually sort of, I'd say employed, but it was like really casual thing to do like demonstrations for local people. And it is really like a locals sort of site. You get a few history buffs and people who are interested in like industrial history coming to see, but it really was like local people, kids groups, the occasional terrifying hen do. I mean, I don't know why you'd go for a hen do there, but we would be subjected to these quite rowdy groups of hens, which was always like scary and fun at the same time. So I was doing demonstrations in this place, and this is where I really sort of learned to enjoy the performance and enjoy sort of the act of what I was doing from another person's perspective. And again, Bethany as well has worked in this site as well. In the picture on the left, you can see the cone. This is from like 1902 or something, and you can see other chimneys in the background. So this area was just covered in these things at one point. And our studio, you can actually see the edge of it on the right hand side of that image, and it was used for quality control, a little bit of cutting, acid etching as well, and all sorts of processes were going on in there. So we're really lucky to be on this site. So doing these talks, it's actually quite good for me to think about why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it's something I've been thinking about quite a lot recently. Someone asked me on a video that I was doing, a video project, like what of you is in your work? And it was like, well, that's obviously something that every artist should know. And so thinking about that more and more often is an important thing. But when you're working with a material which is so like process driven, you spend all your time thinking about how you're going to do something, and the why sort of, it's there, but it takes, for some people, especially for me, it takes longer to actually discover the why. And it's like, it's a slow process, and it's like, sort of like drip feeding and drip thinking the way this sort of comes about. So the reason I'm talking about the area is because it links in directly with why I'm doing what I'm doing and what I'm trying to do with it. So the whole of this area, so it's a few different towns, is known as the Black Country, and it was described by Elihu Burritt as black by day and red by night. So this area was like the heartlands of the Industrial Revolution. The most important aspect of this area was the mineral content and the actual geology of the area, which allowed all of these industries to grow up in this area. So the main industries were limestone. So the resources were limestone for glass, iron ore for chain making, metal making, stuff like that, nails, coal to melt all of this stuff, and clay. So there's an incredible history of pottery making. This area has made like the chains for boats and, for the whole shipping industry. The chains and anchors were made in this area. The glass was made for the Crystal Palace exhibition in London, and, glassware for the royal family and stuff. So it's, all of these jobs were going on in this area, filthy, filthy jobs for people like, working away, making this incredible, amazing stuff, which we have such a pride of, that we used to do this thing, but there was always this thought, even when I was a child, where I was constantly taken around these museums and look what we did, look what we did. And people in the Black Country are very proud, and they have their own dialect. It's sort of yams and ahs and all our kids, and the language that they speak there. I don't have the accent myself, but like most of my family have this. One side of my family have this accent, and it's like it's a completely different language. There's words in there which I don't understand myself still. But there was always this sort of feeling like this stuff was being made by the local people, but it was actually made for someone else and for a completely different area, you know? So this incredible beauty and incredible sort of refinement, none of the people who actually lived there really sort of had these items other than pieces that like had gone wrong or seconds or something like that. So now, like like most ex-industrial areas in the UK, it has one of the highest sort of deprivation rates in the country. The architecture and the sort of former grandeur is still there, but everything is like derelict and slowly being sort of torn down or turned into flats, or in the very rare cases, it's being preserved as like a museum or something we used to do to show to future generations. And growing up working class in this area, I'm thinking about my subject matter, and it's like a lot of my work is obviously thinking about presentation of food and this idea of like um the joy and the preservation, the transience of food and foodstuffs. And it's like I was brought up on probably the worst foods that you could possibly imagine, and the most processed stuff, because you're growing up working class in a deprived area. This is what you're sort of eating. um so thinking about where I got my appreciation for art and my drive to work in the arts and to become an artist. I had one side of my family who are farmers, engineers. My father's a shoe repairer, so I had like very practical people on one side of my family, and then on the other side, I've got family who live in and around London. I've got an uncle who's a diplomat, someone who works and developed a tech company. And I would like visit these people, and then we lucky enough in the UK to have all these free museums full of the most incredible artworks from all over the world that we have acquired in various different ways. So being able to go into London with family members, and walk around and see all this amazing artwork, and then come back to the Midlands where being or sort of pursuing a career in the arts isn't really something that you think of as something you can do. It gave me this sort of appreciation for things that are made and for the arts. So that's how I sort of had this sort of dichotomy where I've got very practical, physical, um, technical sort of appreciation as well as for the finer things. So when I eventually started working with glass, my focus was to use it as a material for sculpture. Um, I had a sort of backwards path into furnace glass working. So I started off making stained glass work. And then I wanted very heavily and very sort of rigorously to pursue sculpture in lost wax. But the process just didn't work for me at all. I think if you're a person who works with hot glass, you have very specific characteristics of, incredible impatience and a need for activity, and waiting for molds to dry and wax to melt isn't something which really works for people who end up making hot glass. So I wanted to use it for sculpture. So my early work is very much sort of inspired by Greek and Roman statuary and marble especially. So a lot of these pieces I wanted to translate this feeling of a marble sculpture into glass. So using these sort of like semi-translucent colors. And at this stage, and in most of my future work, I like the piece to have sort of two lives. So you have one where you're looking at it with direct light, and then one where you're looking at it with transmitted light, because there's no other material that really gives you this opportunity to have something which has two completely different feels to it. And at this point, and to this day, I don't have any like formal artistic education. So no one's ever, I've not been in an institution where they've said, this is what you do, these are the skills of an artist. So in my sort of development, I've been trying to learn the skills of a traditional artist. I see someone who makes bronze sculpture, and really they work with clay. They don't work with bronze, they work with clay. So they're working with clay, so they're a craftsman in clay or something like that. And then I see people who are carving marble, and really they're using all the skills of the stonemason. You have to understand the material qualities of the material you're working with, and then apply it in a way which creates a piece of art. So that's sort of what I was interested in at this point, and sort of investigating the skills of the sculptor and how the body's put together, and all your sort of traditional artistic pursuits. Um, and again, at this point, I was always thinking about the duality of glass, and the opportunities that gives you for like revealing things and hiding things, and creating this skin to contain other sort of ideas and other textures and colors and stuff. So this is where I was thinking of originally. So I'm looking at traditional arts and trying to apply that. Um, while I was making this sculptural work, I still had this sort of love of the functional element of what glassmakers do. I collect ceramics myself. Everything that we eat off at home is brown wood-fired pottery, and I love the idea of having something which is functional and linking that into the industry of the area that I grew up in, and all the people you meet in the pub who used to work as cutters or as gaffers in the glassmaking industry. They make these things for people to use. um there's an amazing beauty in making something that has practical use, but it's not something that I at this point was interested in doing, but I was interested in the doing of it. So I was thinking about the area and this incredible like decorative work that was being made in and this was like world famous stuff. The cameo process that was sort of developed in the Midlands was absolutely world famous, and it sort of links in with Wedgwood sort of jasper ware as well. So these incredible decorative pieces that had a function as well. So I was sort of interested in the process of making and the process of making things with function, but presenting that in a way that it wasn't a functional thing. So it's almost like scratching an itch. It's like I want to make this beautiful thing, but then I want to give it to you in a way which you can't use it. And the idea of something completely losing its function due to the context in which it's presented was really interesting to me. And because I was also looking at sort of, your traditional artistic practices and artistic formats, this is when I started investigating still life and really sort of starting to get interest in this way of, of interpreting the world. So this is when I started looking at still life quite heavily. This is an image that I saw really quite recently, which sort of epitomizes my interest in this area and why I think it's stuck with me for so long, and I've been pursuing it for longer than any other sort of tangent that I've gone off on. So this was taken at, I think it was Tefo, is it called? It's like a big art and antiques fair in Europe. And Reno, who is the curator of glass at Victoria and Albert, who I know sort of fairly well, he took this image, which was just fascinating. And it's a 17th century anonymous still life painting, and then the 17th century Venetian cooling vessel for the fish, so they keep the fish in to cool, is sitting below it. I mean, obviously it's not the same thing, but it's an example of a piece that is in that painting from that era. And this really sort of had the connection for me, because the glass, the connection that glass has with still life painting is just huge, and you can almost like trace the history of glass making through the history of still life painting. You know, the trends change and the forms change, and where the glass was actually made and sourced from, the style of it, you can actually sort of trace that, and sort of trace a little bit of the history of trade between areas as well through still life painting. And the thing I like as well is that this is all like anonymous work. So in the grand hierarchy of the arts, you know, still life is actually quite, you know, quite low in the hierarchy, and glassmaking as an artistic pursuit is, you know, historically even lower. So a lot of this work would have been anonymous. You know, it's like people doing watercolors. Watercolor was seen as, you know, was sort of looked down on as a medium for a long time compared to oils. So still life has the same sort of feel, and I like the idea of, you know, trying to raise, you know, raise it along with the glass as well. So the still life is trying to sort of raise these items and raise our perception of these items and present them in a different way. So yeah, that sort of, you know, epitomizes the interest that I have in it, and also the way that glass was used as a difficult thing to paint to demonstrate the artist's skill. So when I'm making the still life work, I'm sort of trying to demonstrate my skill as a glassmaker, to represent these items as well, represent different items within that would come from still life. So early on, I was sort of focusing on this sort of high contrast of texture, polished areas, and high contrast of you know, color as well. So they were quite dark, and then they had these really bright sort of points of interest in them. And again, you know, using sort of traditional Marini, I guess, like loose Marini techniques to create these forms. And this was like, I can't remember the date that I made these, but these were like really, really early on. So again, as I've gone along, I've been trying to increase my skill and increase my sort of methodology of composition, and learning about the use of light within a piece, and how the forms fit together, and just sort of like refining everything and refining and refining and refining. So in a lot of ways, these are like, it's sort of like a skill building exercise as much as anything else. And again, it's like, you know, the variety of forms that you're sort of looking at and working with is sort of endless. So, you know, you can really keep, you don't have to settle on anything in particular. You can sort of like change stuff and really sort of build up these skills of composition, contrast, and developing an appreciation for form and an understanding of form. Obviously, at this point, you know, because I'm working with glass, the thing you do is you're looking at Venetian glassmaking history, and it's just, there's no way of getting away from that when you're learning, because that's where all the skill, you know, all the sort of refined skills were developed. So we're really sort of looking at Venetian technique and Venetian style. And I have like a massive love-hate relationship with Venetian style, because of the baggage that it sort of comes along with. But in terms of like creating beautiful forms, they did it the best. So this is a piece that is with the gallery. So this is like a much more recent piece. So I've been sort of really sort of diving into the different schools of still life and the different historical focuses and historical areas. So this is obviously a Dutch piece. So there's a couple of artists that I've been really looking at to understand how they worked with composition, and then adding you know, my own style into that, the use of glass as a real focus. So like cutting out all of the color from a piece and really focusing on the form, but then coming back to, you know, the work that I've done before, it's like this dual life of a piece. I really wanted to, because I mean, when you're looking at a painting of still life, you're thinking about the perception that the artist had of what they were looking at and why they were painting it. And those perceptions shift over time. So what I like about this piece is it's all about sort of perception. It's all about context. So the way you display this piece really dictates what it looks like. So with a black background and the right lighting, the whole thing is sort of crystalline and blue and cold and sort of like empty almost. I like this piece because it's all clear and you can see through everything. You don't really know what you're looking at, but then if you present it on a different background, it has this completely other life. And this is just using like a film, which I think is used for like obscuring windows or something like that. So the base that it's put onto is just float glass with this film that's applied carefully onto the base, and it just has this amazing shift. And so depending on where it is and the time of day and the light that's on it, it really changes. So I did a few pieces where I just pulled all of the color out of everything, looked at the form, looked at the composition, had my inspiration from different masters and sort of, cut everything down a little bit, sort of distilled it into something which had this sort of duality and this sort of interest to it. So the sort of genre in a whole is sort of split into like four sort of categories. So you have like your banquets or breakfast pieces, and then you have like pieces which contain animals, alive and mostly dead, really. Then you have bouquets of flowers, and then you have like symbolic pieces, which are mostly fall into the sort of vanitas category. So this is obviously this and the previous piece looking at that sort of vanitas symbolism of death and life. It's more about life than it is about death, I think. So this piece was actually really, and again, this is with the gallery. This was a real sort of trial for me to create, and it took a long time to sort of build up to doing it. So the inside bubble sculpting is something that I've been doing recently, mostly applied to these skulls and having that within the context. And then it also involves this. So this was based on like a 16th century claret jug, and I wanted to use this metallic glass. So the great thing about glass is it can almost look like anything you want. So using this metallic glass to create an object which traditionally would have been made out of pewter or silver, and giving it that sharp sort of metallic feel was really really a big challenge. I actually did the development for this piece when I did a demonstration at John Moran's studio in Belgium. So he invited me over to do a demonstration, and I just thought, well, this is a great opportunity to actually practice trying to make this horrendously complicated form for this piece that I've been wanting to do for quite a while, and I hadn't like built up the bravery to try it in the studio. So I thought, well, I'll just do it in front of a load of people, and that'll take some of the pressure off. And when I was there, I had John and Marta, his partner, there helping, and then this is John. John, oh, I forget. John, who is on
Charvet.
John
Charvet.
Sharvin, of course, it's John Sharvin, who was also a blown away contestant, and England, Minhee England. Yeah, she was on Blown Away as well. So it was like a blown away team, and we made this horribly complicated piece together, which was really good fun. And I think everyone had a lot of tension within that. But then when I got back to the studio, I could make it with more confidence. And this piece was really interesting and really special. The fruit as well. This is the first time in a long while that I'd actually done this sort of had this idea of doing the segmented fruit. The front of the piece is actually completely clear. So most of this piece is the fruit, the peeled orange is completely transparent. There's a hell of a lot of cane work going on behind the transparent. So again, when you turn this piece, it's sort of acting as a lens for the color on the inside, and it sort of, implies a lot of this sort of trickery and tricks of perception that's used within still life painting traditionally. So tricks of perception. These as well are, very recent pieces where I've been looking more at the use of light and gold as well. I mean, I'm not sure whether, I think in a lot of cases, the hue that ends up on these paintings, and I've seen some of these in the flesh as well, like the British Museum. A lot of it is to do with age and sun damage and stuff like that. But I just think, there's like these incredible sort of gold hues that I've been looking at with a lot of the Dutch masters, and as well with there's a Spanish painter, yeah, Zurbarán, who's this was deliberate. All of his pieces have almost like this filter of this beautiful golden light. So this fruit bowl here was directly inspired by some of Juan Zurbarán's paintings. And to sort of get this sort of glow and this feel in glass, I mean, this piece was really like a labor of love because everything within it had to have this color applied with another horrible technique called the Swedish overlay, where you basically turn a bubble inside out on itself so you can have a pure color on the outside of a piece, which is something which is only really done for like decorative growl work and stuff like that, where you're actually you need this pure color to be able to carve through to create a pattern. But I ended up using this technique just to get this beautiful sort of golden glow that you couldn't achieve with, say, powders or frits. A lot of the stuff that I do is quite sort of torturous because I almost refuse to use the quick and easy way of coloring a piece. It's always like quite a laborious thing to create a color which is actually very, very sort of simple and clean. To get these blacks, it's like you have to go through an extra process, which you don't really want to do, but it brings all the color to the surface and gives it that sort of, really sort of luscious feel. So again, with these pieces, I'm really sort of I'm trying again to sort of up my game of composition and my understanding of form, and sinking further and further into the Venetian quagmire, um, and sort of really focusing on that sort of element of it and getting that elegance that you need really to sort of create these pieces. Where are we now? Okay, so obviously I'm looking at Venetian glass an awful lot, and it's just a byproduct of being someone who is involved heavily in the technical aspects of glassmaking. But I really want to, in the future, I want to bring some of the British traditions and the traditions of my area into the work that I'm doing. And these pieces that I'm going to show you now are like my first sort of foray into that realm, and using some of the traditional elements from UK cut crystal and cut crystal design, because that is what the area of Stourbridge was sort of famous for developing. Now, obviously, I've got to work with someone else with this because I am not a cutter. So I'm working with a guy who has been cutting glass for all of the factories for like nearly 50 years, and he's on the edge of retirement. And he's the most incredible craftsman, and just incredibly skilled and knowledgeable about the history of these patterns and who developed them, and where they've come from and what they were inspired by and stuff. So I've been making these sort of blank skulls with again this bubble overlay technique to allow him to sort of play with the idea of decorating these skulls. And it's just like a first. I want to bring this into the still life and to some of my later work, but it was just a great way of sort of demonstrating this skill um, onto something, which is a bit of me, and it has like a contemporary feel to it. So these three pieces here were like test ones. So I just like left them with him to sort of play around with. And he came up with all sorts of different stuff. And then recently we made like the sort of final piece where he really went to town on a lot of these ideas and a lot of these different patterns that are used. The back of this skull is actually incredible. It's called a hob cut, and it's just it's amazing. So we made these like little sort of lens windows for him to do these different patterns on. So that's been like a really interesting development, because I can see this making its way into the still life work and into some of my later pieces. I just really hope that Nick carries on working for a little bit longer, because as soon as he stops, this is all going to stop. So until I can find someone else to work with, which is quite a rare thing. So again, I'm never static with what I'm doing. I'm always sort of running projects alongside each other. And these projects that are running in tandem, each project has my sort of full focus. I don't really know how it works, but I tend to be fully involved in both of the ideas that I'm sort of working with. And again, this is the first time I've been brave enough to actually make this step from a technical and a practical point of view. But thinking about the different categories of still life painting, there's one which was just like glaringly obvious that I was completely shying away from, and that was the bouquets and the blooms and the flower pieces. So what I really like about this is, again, a lot of the techniques that I've used to create these pieces are directly taken from Venetian chandelier making. And as I said before, the sort of golden age of glass was at the exact same period as the golden age of still life painting. That's why you get this crossover, and that's where the interest in it for me is. So I've been developing these, these are quite large pieces, large scale pieces, um, of these flower blooms. And again, it's like thinking about composition. These are, I'm used to working with like multi-component work, but these are obviously single pieces, but they still have an awful lot of components within them that need arranging and need the composition needs to be thought of quite carefully. And the construction of the things has been really interesting as well, because they actually, they'll ship quite easily because all of the components come off. And again, that's the other crossover between the idea of creating these blooms and these compositions of flowers and linking it to glass making traditions. So all of the components are made and could be directly taken from a Venetian chandelier. So that's been a really sort of interesting process. And again, with these, like, the photography has always been a really important part of the process for me. I've worked with my photographer for 15 years since I started making, and as soon as I started working with the still life, he got really into it as well. And so we've created this sort of language with the photography where we're trying to make it look 2D again. It's trying to bring it back into like a sort of still life setting. So we're taking the thing from the 2D to the 3D and back into the 2D again. So the photography has been, a really sort of massive part. And a piece isn't finished for me. The bit I get excited about the most is the photography, because it sets the piece in stone. It's like if this piece gets lost in the future, or disappears, or is in a car crash or something like that, the photograph is still there, and that is still the piece. So it's been really interesting to sort of go through that process with Simon, my photographer. So I was just going to talk a little bit about another body of work, because it's relevant, because one of the pieces is with the gallery. So along with thinking about the composition and the form, obviously all these pieces are involving food. And so I'm in this search at the minute for a contemporary context for what I'm doing. And so this was one of the avenues that I sort of investigated for this contemporary context. So when I was thinking about the foods that I'm, the way that still life has presented these foods, these bountiful, very naturalistic food taken directly from nature and painted. Whereas what we're left with now, and the way the food industry is, now, it's like everything has been taken from its natural state. And we've done it like since we started the agricultural revolution. We've taken something from its natural state and we've just expanded it and exploded it, and taking its natural qualities and just emphasize them again and again and again. And it's like a really shaky foundation to be sort of genetically engineering things from the birth of your own sort of civilization. But that's what we do. We monoculture everything and we just make it the best it can be, and it weakens everything and changes things. And it's not the best thing to do. But I wanted to sort of make these are, again, like really large pieces. So I wanted to sort of show this exaggeration of scale and this perfection that we're trying to create everything in. So you need the perfect fruit, and all the wheat has to be engineered so it's like huge and it's perfect, and it has the most sort of productive impact. And it's a really shaky thing to do. And it's like, this piece particularly, it's on a broken column, so we've like set these things up on very sort of dodgy foundations, and it's what our society is based on, really. So this was an interesting sort of conceptual process for me to go through. And this piece in particular is really special because I made this with the Corning team during my residency there. And it's like, I'd not been to the US before. And, when I went there, I went for like a month and I worked in like 3 different studios and just experienced the scene in the US compared to the UK. And I tried to take, massive advantage. And this piece, was like a team of 6 all day to sort of put together, and then it had to fly back over to the UK, and then I had to do all this work on the base to sort of put it all together. So it's a really sort of special and completely one of a kind piece, because I can't do it again unless they're going to have me back at the museum, in which case I would do something completely different. So yeah, that was an interesting sort of process to go through. And this is a massive corn, which is just brilliant, and I love the color. So um, as I said before, I have this sort of love-hate relationship with the process in general. It's not a pleasant process, and it's a very difficult thing to be doing. And my personality type is really, I'm not entirely suited to the drama and the stress of glassmaking, but it's what I've chosen to do. And there's a lot of like dogma that goes along with, especially Venetian technique, and I'm sure a lot of sort of traditional artistic practices, they have their rules and it's really strict. And I'm not really, fully comfortable with that, because I haven't ever like had any training. Everything that I've really learned has been from like adapting things that I've seen other people do from far away, from like YouTube and stuff. So I have this sort of uncomfortable position with a lot of these very technique based things. But again, it's like what I've chosen to do. And when I started developing this series of work, again, I'm sort of searching for like a contemporary context to the work that I'm making. It took myself and my assistant Bethany like 4 months to develop the skill set to be able to create these perfect Venetian goblets. And again, this is fed into a lot of the still life work that I do. I needed to be able to create a perfect goblet, and so we spent a lot of time developing this skill. And then what we did with a lot of the pieces was we'd create the goblet as perfectly as we could, and then we'd distort it and we'd crush it and we'd pin it to the wall with a great big hand forged nail. So these pieces are called irreverents. So there's a lot of bowing down to the idea of being able to make a simple Venetian wine vessel. And there's a lot of sort of there's a lot of bravado within it. And so what I wanted to do was develop the skills and then use it for a contemporary piece. So these have been in different installations of like 30 or 40, and then they also work individually as well. So they've been really interesting pieces to make. And this is the first time that I've worked with another material as well. So here I've been working with a jeweler who makes this big chunky jewelry. So he's been forging these bronze nails, and we did a set with silver nails and then patinating. So it's been interesting sort of process to start looking into different materials. So these pieces were sort of inspired by it's like the antithesis of this process of like preserving broken pottery. So you have such love for this beautiful vessel, you smash it and then you glue it back together with gold. And then there's a Dutch artist, Boek de Vries, who takes these broken ceramics and then encases them within the glass form. So it's like the opposite of these sort of pieces, this idea of preserving and having this reverie. And then I wanted to do the opposite of that and have an irreverence to the process and an irreverence to the pieces. And here we are in the sort of vagaries of the future, which is always the place that I'm looking at. So the work that I'm sort of working on at the moment is taking the still life concept, taking the pieces from the still life and putting them into a different finding a different way of presenting them. And one of the artists I've been looking at quite heavily is a Spanish still life painter, again from like the 16th, 17th century, Sanchez Cortan, who did these really sort of surreal framed investigations of different items. So it's completely different from a lot of the other work that was being done at the time, and it's like really quite surreal. And I've been looking into his methodology of how the pieces are presented and the the way that they're sort of contextualized alongside other artists who are taking something quite traditional and then shifting it in quite an extreme way. So I've been experimenting with AI to try and help me visualize. I've been putting still lifes on their side and mounting them to the wall. I've been having my casters make zip ties out of bronze and silver. So this is like, my sort of future development. And I've also started a collaboration with a company who make pulp molded paper packaging, which I think is going to be a fascinating sort of collaboration where we're taking it's as if one of the still life pieces is being shipped to you in a cheap cardboard box. So there's, I'm sort of looking into the future and how I can sort of conceptualize these pieces in a different way. And it's always interesting when you're starting on something new because you never know where it's gonna end up. So the final piece I'm going to talk about is and very briefly now, is the work that I did with the V&A, and I think this is a really nice piece because again it sort of links in with my love of sort of trying to elevate forgotten or no longer practice things. So like with the vessel making in the industry in my area, it's like that has gone now, and I want to try and find ways of sort of bringing that into my work. This was a collaboration I did with the V&A where they asked me to take inspiration from a piece from their collection. And I think they thought I would be making something based on one of the amazing vessels or something, but they have all these incredible drawers full of tiny little bits of anonymous, forgotten, broken glass. And this little piece, this little fragment really sort of spoke to me. It's a tiny little thing, and it has these beautiful gilded fish painted on it. So I actually made a version of this piece for a video of how glass making is done. So it's on their YouTube channel. It's a really well put together video of how the glass making process works. And so I took this little fragment and then I made it in my style, which was really interesting process to go through. And I've been there since, and I found other sort of little fragments that I'm going to try and develop this sort of series of wall pieces, very sort of limited series of wall pieces from. So yeah, that was a really special piece as well, which again is with the gallery. And that is the end of my talk. So thank you very much for your time and for listening.
Thank you, Ellie. That was incredible. Please stop sharing your screen. That was really enlightening opportunity to gauge your world and what you've been up to and what you're going to be up to. I'm impressed how you do the interiors of the fish. I have no idea how you put the guts in the fish in the glass. Quite an amazing process. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you all of you for joining me via this Habitat Zoom. There is a list of available works that Elliot is offering through the gallery on our website. Feel free to check that out, asking for a price list. It is a real great opportunity to jump in and see Elliot's vision for not only what he's worked on in the past, but in the future, and where he's going to be leading the future of the medium, whether we like it or not. So thank you again, Elliot.
I just wanted to say a word because
sure.
Kathy and I acquired one of Elliot's pieces, and she had to go along with it because I was possessed by it.
I did too.
Yeah, I know. She liked it also, but I couldn't walk by it without spending some time with it. So now it's in our collection. And I tell you, I think this is one of the most exciting artists working in the world today. And I'm honored to have a piece.
Thank you.
Thank you for it. It's incredible. Now that obviously Elliot talks so much about composition and its importance. Is it set up correctly? Is the question in your home?
It's set up brilliantly.
All right, perfect.
Exactly like he wanted it.
Great. Well, thank you again, everybody. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week for another Habitat Zoom. And thank you, Elliot, once again for joining us today.
Thanks so much, everyone.
All right, everybody, be well. See you next time. Bye-bye.